Welcome everyone to this CEO MasterClass session on employee health and wellbeing. I'm Sharon Bly and I'm the Health and Sustainability Director here at the Consumer Goods Forum, and I'm thrilled to be in such great company as we deep dive into a session that I'm very personally and professionally passionate about. So warm welcome to the CEO of Migros Turkey, Özgür Tort. Özgür, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to help us build the advocacy and the support and championing this topic of employee health and well-being. So welcome, Özgür. And our Managing Director here at the Consumer Goods Forum, Wei Chan, for leading us through the next 30 minutes. So just to set the scene in 1 minute context before we deep dive into this masterclass with Özgür, to give you an idea of employee health and well-being and why it's so important for us at the Consumer Goods Forum. Collaboration for Healthier Lives is one of our global coalitions with the ambition to empower healthier people around the globe, obviously looking after consumers and shoppers in all of your businesses, but also the 10 million people that work across CGF member companies, and we hope the positive impact that we can have on the 90 million across the supply chain. So this is part of an effort that we kicked off at the start of this year, really bringing focus around employee health and well-being, sharing stories, leadership, insights like what we're going to do today. And we also brought this again to the top of our agenda at our Global Summit in Japan in June, where we gave another call to action or an acceleration across the 400 members of the Consumer Goods Forum and what we can do to deep dive into this topic of employee health and well-being. So that's where this sits in terms of the CGF priority areas. And Özgür, again, a big thank you for sharing your insights. So I will hand it over to yourself and Wei Chan for a great discussion over the next couple of minutes. Thank you very much.
Welcome, everybody. So good to see all of you. I can see people all the way from Japan, all the way to Latin America in the attendees list. So it's great that you're there, and welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you may be. So good to see all of you. Thank you very much for joining. Well, Özgür, it's always a pleasure to speak to you, and I know that we've had a good working relationship. At least from my point of view, it was good. Hopefully, from your point of view, it was good too. We've had a good working relationship in the past. I just very much like talking to you, and I think it's also very good to get a point of view from somewhere as unique as Turkey, because obviously we have a lot of members in the core western part of Europe. We have a lot of members in North America, etc. But it's always good to get different views about how people handle different things across the world. And I think a view from Turkey is actually something very unique. So I'm very excited by this conversation. So, but enough of me talking, because I'm not really here to listen to me talk at all, but really to listen to you. And so I have a few questions for you, and please, I'd be very interested in your answers. So the first question is around well-being itself. So as Sharon explained, we're here to talk about well-being. How do you define it? So maybe you start philosophically. How do you define well-being, and why is health and wellness so important for business? So those questions as a starter.
Thank you, Wei Chan, and thank you, Sharon, for this nice organization. We will be always glad to share our experiences as we did in the past. So the basic definition is very simple. I mean, we have been doing this for several years now. We define the well-being in three main dimensions. That's very clear. One of them is balanced nutrition, what we call definitely most important priority, especially in emerging countries as well. And the second piece is very clear, physical activity, I call it. And of course, the mental health, the third major piece. So when we combine all of them, I will call it being well in these three dimensions is the well-being. So if you are well, if you feel well, that is the clear agenda. Why this is really an important one? I believe, of course, the globe is changing rapidly in the last decade. And of course, health was always a concern, but with our ongoing challenges, it is becoming a further even an important issue. We have this pandemic impact, which is still bothering everyone. And next, we had the energy crisis, then the food supply chain issues, and all the inflation that we are experiencing are putting a significant pressure on, especially for the food supply chain. That is very critical, first of all, for a nutrition perspective, but also the new environment that we are all feeling, especially the continuing inflation and the side effects of this new economic tone. is really impacting everyone on every segment, on all the not just limited with the shoppers, but definitely for our employees as well. So this is why, in terms of timing, it's a really great moment to really push all of our efforts for our employees' health and wellness. This is why I call it a real structured effort necessity for all the initiatives that we are taking in place. One thing is very clear. I mean, not to repeat ourselves for the same perspective, but our business results are totally dependent on, especially on service industries like food retail, and your colleagues feeling well is the real critical step forward for a good job, for a better performance. So, but in the mind of what is changing, especially nowadays, when we call the new leadership skills that are very important for keeping up our employees' well-being as well, is not just, of course, what we feel on the arena of feeding ourselves or just providing the environment, but now we are adding new skills to our leaders, next to the trustworthiness or just the know-how that we all need for the basic skills. We need the dynamism. I mean, in this new environment, require dynamism. In this new environment, definitely require leaders to be a positive mindset. So these are all the great assets that we are expecting as the next skill sets of the leaders, but that is all dependent on how they feel well themselves, by physically, by just mentally. So this is why the leadership skills are even going through an important change, where we on one side focus on the employee's necessity to have a healthier life, but also at the same time the business environment requires that in the same perspective.
Interesting, very, very interesting. So the way you define well-being is three things: nutrition, physical, and mental. And the reason why it's important for business is because number one, the pressure of the pandemic has actually impacted everyone in some way. And also, I think interestingly enough, you mentioned the new leadership skills, and therefore having to be positive. And if you're not well, then the positivity actually cannot transfer to what you do. I think that's a very interesting way to look at it, because historically, you would not think that positive mindset is something that you typically ask of your employees to try and drive change. So I think that's a very very interesting way of doing it. Now, if I may just build on that, we know that boosting employee health and well-being is critical. The co-chairs have expressed how important that is. What do you believe leadership can do in order to bring change? Why is leadership so critical? Now, apart from the obvious thing that things flow down from the top, etc. Why do you think leadership is so important to drive change and therefore drive this implementation? That's the question.
Wai-Chen, that is the really the important piece of how we really enable this initiative to take priority within our agendas. First of all, we all know that, I mean, to be really rational and at the same time, eligible with all the other dimensions of our investors, of our, stakeholders and everyone, all the companies that we are working are guided by specific important targets. And these are mostly measured by financial targets or the market share type of, KPIs. But we all know that the new generation, which is, statistically it's proven right now, the new generation of employees, I mean, for my industry, at least for my company, I can name you the people or just my employment set at the moment is almost 90% is coming from Generation Y and Generation Z. So this is the profile that we have right now in front of us. These are our employees at the storefront, our employees at the warehouses, the meat plants and everywhere. So if you take this into consideration, your financial targeting and all the other aspects are not just enough to embrace those employees for their future expectations. I mean, we know that all the companies are now shifting themselves into a purpose-driven organization. I mean, you can name any purpose, but at the same, I mean, if you are talking here about grocery business, let's take a simple example of transforming your grocery business, your grocery shops, into something, let's say, a healthier product providing and healthier processes to embrace the new planet requirements. So if we just simply say a couple of sentences, then your financial targets becomes much more clear why you need to do that. So that is why the leadership of the top executives are definitely important. I mean, no discussion, no doubt. But the way we embrace it in two-dimensional is the key, I guess, for the success. So when it comes to such environment, having your aggressive targets that you have to satisfy your stakeholders, which should be just also supported definitely, maybe even much more prior with your purpose, why you want to achieve these targets. And that purpose really drives the leadership, and that purpose really have the focus of the all the new generation that we have been asking to do the job for us. So for such environment, I believe the positive working environment, which is very important, the segment, or either it's a simple office or just the store itself, the environment that you build for your employees are becoming much more critical one. And at the same time, your human resource, which is the greatest asset, the largest asset, should be a healthy asset. And if you are healthy enough, if your leaders are healthy enough, if your employees are healthy enough, then your purpose will be, somehow driven with a larger organizational vision. And we know the other piece is very clear, is just, once you touch them with your leadership, they become like I will call it a domino effect. So when you touch one of your, great employee, then you touch their lives into their families. Then once they are feeling themselves better on physically or just mentally, then their behavior acting towards the shoppers are completely different. An employee feeling good that morning, the way they serve to the shoppers is completely different to the opposite direction. So that is why it is a leadership skill right now. That is why we are just underlining that skills that we are asking from our leaders has been changing. So that's number one criteria. We have all those physical realities that, hygienic factors of a leadership, but has to have a real dynamic, healthy mindset without any discrimination, of course, but we rather prefer a healthier lifestyle of our leaders. And of course, which will definitely give them a positive mindset. So, of course, leading by examples is just more critical thing. And when it comes to leadership, it's always a clear set of criteria, right? It should be a holistic approach that you have to embrace everything on one set of form. We are now building a new festival, which we repeat by every 2 years. And that festival is a great asset for our gatherings. We want to combine all of our store managers without exception under one roof, and all of our suppliers, leaders under one roof, and also the shoppers under one roof for about 4 days of event. We get together, try to understand what is going on. In their lives, there is no business discussion there. We just see the products, we just see the services, we just see the atmosphere. Nothing discussed in terms of financial targets or anything, but the way we combine all of them in a holistic way, suppliers, shoppers, and at the same time our work is under one umbrella, it gives a great asset for the positive outlook of, yes, we can do that. We can do this change because this is directly to the shopper's benefit. We can do this change because my supplier is now targeting my shopper as much as I target the same perspective. So these are where we definitely lead the leadership advocacy.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that the positive outlook. I think that's a very kind of philosophical, but also practical way of looking at it. And I love the idea about the fact that you need dynamism in the new world order, and this dynamism can only be driven if you're actually well in yourself. So I love those ideas. You also mentioned that you needed to have important targets, and I know we're going slightly off script, but I'm sure you hopefully can answer questions. And by the way, audience, if you have more questions to ask, please do use the chat to ping us some questions. But you mentioned that there might be some important targets. Do you have any specific targets as it relates to well-being? How do you look at it in some kind of metric? Is it the numbers of programs that you run? Is it the number of people that you touch in some way? How do you define a target for well-being?
Definitely, the idea here is, of course, with clear examples, but the penetration level of your activities to touch. This is what I do care the most, because the activity that you plan for your head office can be a great activity, but it's a limited. I mean, this is just probably 5-10% of your employment. The rest 90% should be just penetrated, and this is where the real life is experienced. So this is why I will definitely call the penetration level of the 4 major activities that you are doing. This is the penetration that we have to increase as the leaders.
Okay, no, very, very clear. I think maybe the audience is interested in the next question. I think that's probably the most important question, which is, what do you guys do to boost the employee health and well-being? I'm sure you've got many examples, and I think this is where I think a lot of our members get benefit, because they see what you do and then think, oh, I could translate that to what I do. So I think maybe just give some ideas and hopefully inspire the crowd to go back and see if they work in their own particular companies and countries.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we have been doing this for years, right, Wai-Chen? I mean, this is what we really like to learn from each other. That's a great experience, and I will try to do my best to keep it short, because I mean, this is the area where we can share the most. Of course, in a structured manner, we can really classify the efforts under probably 4 or 5 different dimensions. First of all, we have the concrete proposition. What we call the whole program itself is called Migros Better Future Plan. So what is Better Future Plan? Of course, one of the great pillars here, a better future for our employees. So a better future for our employees is the main motto for the whole program, and this is the level of penetration that we want to embrace every single cashier, every single butcher, every single employee at the company. So in that respect, of course, what I will prioritize, number one, is the health itself, the real physical health. So it might be very simple sometimes, and it's always probably a practical way of implementing, but starting from the simplest possible, where everyone will perceive, I think these are the better examples of complicated mainstream structures. What we have initiated is just a simple 3-course of meal for every worker. So that's a simple proposition. I'm sure that every retailer has similar challenges. Some of our workers, depending on their lifestyles and average age and everything, they may not be just having a great lunch. I mean, they may have their own preferences for a quick lunch, for a fast food, for anything. What we have come up with, we said, okay, we will provide a real meal, a cooked real meal, 3-course of cooked meal for every single worker of our employment. It sounds simple, I know, maybe it's a just hygienic factor, but if you dive in, there are great, challenges that you have to face. First of all, the calorie calculation. Second is very important, the diet itself. I mean, some of your employees have their own specific diets. Some of them are vegetarian, some of them. So it's a real complicated. You start very simple, but it gets complicated. So what we have seen here, of course, it's relatively easy at the main head office, because you can just cook anything and you can easily diet it. But when it comes to stores and warehouses, where at least for us, for instance, 65,000 people are working, to adjust the calories, to adjust the diets, and everything is really getting complicated. Now we have a new initiative to solve that. We removed all the relevant, some kind of food checks and everything, where, it's simple. You can just buy in a quick lunch. And we are replacing it right now with what we call a new initiative of building our own factory to really provide a healthy, standard, ready meal. So that's the initiative to provide for our shoppers, but the same initiative will definitely start from our employees. And I think both the health-wise and also the commercial-wise, it makes a lot of sense if you can satisfy your 65,000 employees with a simple, standard, but healthy, ready meal then you can just motivate your shoppers with the same expectation. So that's one of the initiatives, and it's working extremely well. I mean, our employees are greatly, very, very happy to realize that they are receiving a pre-packed, pre-cooked, just ready to heat and serve type of ready meals, minimum 3 course with exact calculated calories intakes and everything. Another piece here, of course, especially nowadays with a high inflation environment, everybody has a concern on how they can at least feed themselves. I mean, even in some part of the world. So that is why we just come up with what we call the food allowance, which this one, even if you serve your lunch at the employment level, you are not sure about your breakfast or just a dinner, then we come up with the food allowance definition, which is almost like equivalent of 2 monthly minimum wage. This is the threshold that we want to target. So 2 months of minimum wage is provided yearly as a food allowance to all of our shop employees. And this can be only spent in grocery. And this cannot be just spent elsewhere. This is not a salary piece. It's a side benefit that they can only use it at the grocery store of our umbrella, which provides them an extra effort for a healthier breakfast and for a healthier dinner. And similarly, when now extending our what we call the health insurance packages, of course, relatively easy for head offices and everything where the income levels are relatively higher than the regular store environment, you provide them a full coverage health insurance. That's maybe a kind of a side benefit. But when it comes to the 65,000 people, next to the state provided social security health insurance, you have to have some extra extensions that, all the employees can benefit out of it. It's a simple one. That's a great asset, especially once you have the state-driven health insurance package, which is mandatory. Second piece is what we provide, the inpatient support for the specific purposes that our employees cannot benefit with 100 perfect service. So that is why we are now providing for all the employees a side benefit called just for inpatient treatments, relevant for every private hospital next to the state hospitals. So that's another extra effort that we are providing them. These are the two major, simple, easy to express, not really complicated. We do care about your health. Of course, next to them, there are several different initiatives like psychological well-being. I mean, we have been providing a very great hotline for psychological and medical consultancy approaches. Interesting enough, I mean, every year we have about 2,000 calls. I mean, that's a yearly number, but I'm still impressed that this number is a significant one. I mean, in such, and the majority part of it, of course, is psychological one. And this is why it brings us a new science that where do our employees have issues? I mean, what kind of treatment that they, even though these are all private information, but statistically we can combine them in order to help the rest of our employees who are just having difficulty to even express themselves into a consultancy line. So then it's a two-way. On one side, we get information and we try to help them, but with the statistics that we provide, we are approaching the other employees who are not, actively communicating. So another, of course, designing the physical part of it is very important again for stores and warehouses. I'm sure every retailer has similar concerns and solutions. We are going through a new process redesign. It has been started with the initiative of automation, store automation, warehouse automation. But we have given them a new dimension where we call, let's redesign the autonomous solutions for an average person, indifferent of gender, indifferent of age, can simply and easily do its own job. It can be goods in, goods out. It can be shelf checking. It can be, staying longer hours because of your cashier duty. So this type of re-engineering or redesigning is going through a new exercise for us. and including all the positive working environment targeting for a simple job into a complex job itself. So this also covers, of course, the socialization areas. People can spend time to socialize themselves next to the working hours. Some other programs like Happy Family, I mean, these are simple again, but it works extremely well for workers with babies and new life balance issues. So these are great assets. Again, another consultancy free of charge that we are providing with great consultants to help them. How do they care their babies with a life balance of work and life balance environment? And finally, I may expect to give us what kind of a shift in some of our activities that we know that it's some part of it, it's a cost. We have to make sure that this is the awareness, but it comes sometimes a kind of cost-cutting efforts and everything. When you just start doing some issues, you start from cutting from training, cutting from some other areas. We secured what we call a secure zone. We call it a secure dedicated budget zone for all the departments regarding health and wellness issues. So that's, I believe, an important step forward. And I'm glad that our board has approved that approach. So there is not going to be a sacrifice from expense perspective on the initiatives that we have been taking and we will be taking. So that's a great asset, especially for simple activities like bicycling, camping, healthy cooking, photography classes. These are all great assets. It really improves. I mean, sports festivals, all the monthly breakfasts that we are gathering ourselves, happy hours. These are all great assets. Some of them are physical activities. Some of them are, social, mental health driven organizations. These are all the assets that we want to keep up continuing for the motivation and to make sure that the budgets are allocated there. So these are the areas that I can share at least for today's agenda.
Yeah, well, we've got a few minutes left, but I just want to. I love the fact that you ring fence the budget, which I think is tremendous, right? And the investors allow you to ring fence the budget to put aside for this. So I think that's we should all take our hat off for that, because I think that's a fantastic achievement. I also love the hotline, because the way you described it, it's a radar system for you as well, right? In other words, people phone up and you might get patterns, and then you can see some of the issues that your employees face, and therefore you might design a program around it. And I love that kind of radar. I just call it radar system of doing it. In the final 2 minutes, we may have a couple of clarifying questions, and I'll group two of them together. I mean, one anonymous attendee has asked about the pre-prepared lunch. Do you give it to everybody around the world, or I guess in Turkey, do you give it to everybody? And you mentioned that you try to balance nutrition. Is there a definition of nutrition? So I'll combine those two into one, and then if we've got time, we can ask the last question. So yeah. You send it to everybody, and how do you define this is a balanced meal, basically?
First of all, we have been now partnering, and we bought a real stake. I mean, we built a joint venture with a food ready meal factory. So this is the area that originally was planned to serve a ready meal providing to our shoppers. But when we initiated the project, we started testing the products with our own employees. And all of a sudden, we found out that these products can be justified for a healthy, balanced nutrition fact as a main course, 3 courses for a great lunch. And it's working extremely well. And that is why right now, as I said, the penetration level is our success factor. We are covering almost 40% of our stores at the moment, and the target is clearly 100%. 100% of our employees will be served with the same standard, healthy, ready meal for lunch. So that is the motto. And of course, depending on the capacity and the recipes calculation, and balanced nutrition is just a kind of course, advisory that we get. I mean, for as I expressed, 90% of our employees on the field are generation Y and Z. So we know their age averages, and to justify the taste and to justify the calorie intake, we are trying our best effort with some advisors to help us in that front.
Okay, great. We're exactly on time, and I'd love to continue the conversation, but unfortunately we don't have enough time. But I hope the audience found that incredibly useful. To me, I took away a whole bunch of little snippets of programs that Oscar and his wonderful company has launched, and I think many of them could be inspirational for the others, and hopefully the audience learned a little bit, can take away some of those ideas and maybe start to implement it. But ring fencing is fantastic. The radar system is fantastic. The fact that you care about people's balanced diets and leadership, I think those are particular standouts for me. So thank you very much, Oscar, and thank you very much, audience, for joining.